Hello, and welcome back, most illustrious members of the Detail. I'm your host D, also known as MTF Doom, and today we're going to talk about a concept called opportunity cost, what it is, and how it might be making you make suboptimal deck choices. I hope you enjoy. So just before we get into it, as always, I appreciate and ask kindly that you subscribe if you find my content, or I suppose my personhood, endearing. A lot of people do it for either reason, and I appreciate both very much. Join the Discord down below if you have an idea that you want to send directly to me. I do read all comments. I appreciate anyone who talks to me. That's it. Anyone who talks to me, I appreciate. I just like talking, and I like when people talk to me. Thank you. That's end of pitch. So, if you don't know, opportunity cost is what you miss by including a card in your deck. And so, almost cut my hair. This deck, the deck that got me to Infinite, has a really good example of this, in the form of what was for a while Chavez, what could be Korg, but what is right now Maria Hill. And so, the point is, there's a lot of people when you deck build, you've probably, I know I've thought this. I know. I can give you an example from my favorite Magic deck in Modern. I'll do that in a second. But you've probably had this thought of, well, this card works really well, I should include it. And it's such a, you're like, you might be like, D, how could that be wrong? But the reality is, Maria Hill in this deck has a cost. Even though she does everything you want in this deck, she adds a 1 cost to your hand, and she is a cheap card, right? So the 1 cost she adds, we talked about this, works well with Beast, Falcon, and Angela, and Bishop, right? Usually Bast, like we can usually include Bast in that. There's very few 1 costs that Bast will lower the power on. We could even go as far as to say it also has synergy with Hitmonkey, right? Because it's just another 1 cost. Explicitly, she has synergy with Collector because she's added a card to your hand. So, how could all of this be bad? And the answer is it's not. In fact, it happens to be the card I've landed on as my choice, my personal preference, because I value scaling the Collector slightly more than some other things I've found from my playing. But the point is, this could have been Chavez, right? Like, you in Magic, you are technically allowed to add a 61st or 62nd or X amount. You can add more than 60 cards to your deck. Here, you shouldn't do that, by the way. In Magic, there's such little reason to add even 1 extra card. Statistically, one of those cards is the worst card, and that should be the card that you take out. And don't make it be a land. Don't do it. Don't go down to 11 lands. You cannot go down to 11 lands, please. But the opportunity cost of Maria Hill is that she isn't a different card. She isn't Sentinel or Scarlet Witch or whatever. And so usually we kind of think of opportunity cost as like tech cards, right? Well, like, you know, Luke Cage is good if you're against Hazmat or the upcoming High Evolutionary. That's going to be tomorrow's video, by the way. Fucking spoilers. Luke Cage is good in those situations, but bad in a lot of other situations, right? The opportunity cost is very apparent when you have a Luke Cage in your hand, but you need something that has more than 2 power. They saw that the opportunity cost was too high for things like Enchantress. It's probably too high for like Shadow King. You know, only being a 3/3, you're losing out on this being something that could either help your deck more, or just have more base stats. With the effect being on reveal, win some amount of games is not you know, it isn't worth the opportunity cost for most people, right? So that's what it is. But it gets brought up a lot when we're doing especially our communal deck building channel. This happens all the time, of people who are like, well, you know, I have this list and it's got 18 cards in it and I just don't know what to cut. And you can tell that they've kind of like, you know, oh, well, they're playing a discard deck, so they included every card that said discard a card. Whether it said discard from both players' hands, whether it said, you know, discard your lowest, your highest, discard itself, right? Oh, well, this one synergizes with Ghost Rider. And this one, you know, oh, well, you have to have Apocalypse, you know? Oh, well, Strong Guy, if your hand is empty. Like, all of these make perfect sense. None of them, you're not wrong for wanting to include all those cards. But you have to think of it as, like, some of those cards are going to be the best card you can play in a bunch of situations, and some of them are going to be ass bad almost every time you play them, and it's not even close. And that's in a nutshell, that's opportunity cost. But it's really hard, and I understand that it's really hard, but you know, it's something worth interrogating yourself, thinking about, and deciding very intentionally that it is worth the trade-off or not. And I guess that's it, right? That's it. There's not even really an answer. Like I said, I actually don't think Maria Hill is the best card that could be in that slot, but it is certainly the card that has worked the best for me. And it didn't come from me just being like, I don't know, what's a card that says 1 costs on it? It came very intentionally through a set of interactions of me losing to certain decks and going, you know, if only I had like one more thing to pump Collector into that lane while still deploying, and just going, yeah, you know what? Maria Hill, I think I mentioned this, it was Cable, with my thought process being, it gives me information on my opponent, and technically Cable gets buffed by Bast, while Maria Hill is just a wash. Like, she doesn't get buffed by Bast. But Maria Hill, you can be much more certain that you can play Maria Hill then Bast than playing Cable then Bast. Because Maria Hill, the 1 cost that gets added to your hand, getting put to 3 power, is almost universally good. Even if it's a Titania. Right? Even if it's kind of like the 1 drop that you probably don't want to get hit by Bast. Like, Titania is fine to get put to 3 power, because all you're going to do is play her as the last card you play on turn 6, and it's still fine as 3 free power plus another play, plus 1 off Collector, plus 1 off out. Like, you know what I mean? So this whole process has been really useful to me to learn and internalize another step of this, of opportunity cost. And to go back to that example I mentioned in Magic, there was this deck. It was a red-black sacrifice deck in Modern, right before New Capenna came out. And so it ran Cat Oven. It ran, if you don't know, Cat Oven is Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. And Cauldron Familiar says, it's a 1/1 for 1. When it enters, it drains your opponent for 1 life. And if it's in your graveyard, you can sacrifice a food, which is just like a token that gets generated naturally through a bunch of different card effects, to return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. And Witch's Oven says, sacrifice a creature, make a food. And you can only do it once per turn. So you see the loop, right? You play the Witch's Familiar, you sack it you play Cauldron Familiar, you sack it to Witch's Oven. It makes a food when it sacrifices. You sacrifice the food, you bring back the Cauldron Familiar, you drain your opponent again. You can also do things like block and sacrifice in response. So it ran that. It ran things like Oni Cult Anvil. It ran things like Disciple of the Vault. All things that say, like, when you sacrifice an artifact or when you sacrifice anything, you get some value. So it played a bunch of little... honestly, in a lot of ways, it was a lot like this deck. I think that's why this deck resonated with me so much, this Kitty Pride deck, because it just played a bunch of low-cost stuff that wasn't very impactful on its own, but over time it built up a lot of value, and it could do a lot of interesting things, and like your opponent had a really hard time interacting with it favorably, because like, yeah, I want all my stuff dead. Doesn't matter if you were going to kill it, I'll just sacrifice it instead, you know? And so New Capenna was coming out, and there was this card called something like Fearless Underdog, something Underdog. And the point is, it had an ability that it could play itself, attack with haste, and then sacrifice itself and draw a card. But you could also play it from the graveyard to do the same thing, but you'd lose 2 life. So all of that combines to be like, yeah, that's all stuff you want to do in this deck. All of that is really cool. It's a creature that draws a card that wants to sacrifice itself that you can play from the graveyard, so it's good in your hand or on the field or in the graveyard. It's good in all zones. And it's just like, it, you know, my buddy who I was playing with a lot at the time was like, oh, D, you gotta find a spot. You gotta have at least 2 of this card. And I was like, yeah, but like, there's not a spot in this list. The list is too tight. It has everything it needs, and there's no room. Like right now, there's no cuts I could make. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna take it. So he takes the 75 from me directly. And I'm like, all right, tell me what 2 to cut. Here, hold it. You hold this deck. Tell me what 2 to cut. I'll put in the Underdog. And like 2 weeks later, he gets back to me. He's like, D, there's no cuts. I was like, I know. There's nothing to cut. It's just like this deck, honestly. There's one cut, and it's Maria Hill, but I don't even know what the cut is. And Maria Hill is good enough. And I like playing with Maria Hill. So that's it. That's all of it. That's the anecdote. That's all of it. This is an important video to get out today, because we're going to talk about opportunity cost a lot with how we talk about high evolutionary and the decks that we're going to play them in tomorrow. So it's important that we have this base knowledge, this foundational knowledge that we all share, because I'm going to be saying things that you're going to go, yeah, you should include this card. You should include this card. And I'm going to have to point to this video and go, no, these other cards are better in more situations and often enough that I don't think I want to include those cards. And so that's kind of where this all came from. Also, it's just a video I've wanted to do for a while. It just slots in really well right at this moment. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you find my content elucidating, enlightening, or enriching. Like, subscribe, follow, join the Discord so you can be in on the ground floor of conversations like this. You could join in. We got the monthly tournament coming up. It's going to be a banger. We got better coverage happening. And I hope you have a great day, and I will see you all tomorrow.